Welcome to a special series of the Reimagine podcasts. These podcasts were created in partnership between Nassau Reimagine, Nassau Financial Group, and the Barney School of Business at the University of Hartford. In the next few weeks, we will explore the frontiers of risk and innovation. Join the Reimagine team, Barney's faculty and students, and leading thinkers in the sector to explore how technology, science, and entrepreneurship will shape risk management in the future. In today's episode, we will discuss blockchain, which has almost exclusively been associated with cyber currency transactions. Blockchain, when examined on its own, is emerging as an operating system, which can facilitate many business-to-business transactions. The new emerging risk management environment introduces many business practices such as smart contracts, the use of alternative currencies, and expedited claim processes. Properly structured and controlled, blockchain transactions offer significant enhancements to risk financing, which can be secure, timely, accurate, and reconcilable.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another podcast in a special series that we're doing for the Reimagine podcast. Laura, good to be together again.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And we're excited. As you mentioned, it's a series that we're running here. And today's the second conversation taking place in the Innovation and Risk podcast series. And we're producing it in partnership with the University of Hartford Barney School of Business. And the conversations really are created to provide insight, not just into the how, but also into the why. So as we dig in with these partners at Barney School of Business, and then also the, showcasing startups, intellectuals, individuals, all advancing the future of finance. And in some cases, kind of debunking or demystifying things. And today with our conversation around blockchain, I think we're going to be doing a lot of that. So in studio, we have with us today Simon Kolkman, co-founder and CTO of RYSKEX. We have Alexander Boyd, founder of the Q Squared Project and a student over at the Barney School of Business. And John Thompson, he's the Assistant Dean, Career Ready Programs at UHart. Again, great partners and all, and we're looking forward to the conversation today. With that, Alec, why don't you open it up?
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you guys for having me on. I'm Alec Boyd, going to be graduating next year from the Barney School of Business at UHart. I'm the founder or co-founder and president of Q Squared Project at the University of Hartford. Really interested in all things blockchain, so I'm really glad to be here today.
Yeah, maybe I go on. My name is Simon. I'm located in Germany, and I'm the CTO of RYSKEX, and I also co-founded the company. Maybe a little bit about my background. I studied computer science, really with the focus on cryptography and IT security. So I have a very deep technical understanding of blockchain technology. And I co-founded RYSKEX, which is a startup company, a fintech, if you will, where we do parametric risk transfer, sort of in the B2B insurance space.
Excellent. So, John, so I'm blockchain. It's digital currency, right? That's kind of how I should understand it.
Well, that unfortunately, that's sort of the view of most of the world right now. We've become associated, like almost one for one, that blockchain and cryptocurrency or Bitcoin are one and the same thing. And yes, while blockchain does enable the transactions to be conducted via cryptocurrencies, its applications and its possibilities far exceed a direct linkage to cryptocurrencies and that we know today. And they can have a very dramatic impact on business models and how business is conducted, and particularly focusing on how risks can be financed. And that's really one of the angles that we are trying to explore and understand, is to develop other well-known applications for blockchain. So, Alec, why don't you open it up and throw out some of the questions that we've been talking about that we'd like to get clarification on?
Yeah. So, Simon, my first question is going to be for you. It's just what is blockchain? What are some of the principles that this blockchain technology is based on, and why would people want this decentralized distributed ledger?
That's a great question. And I also like the explanation or the distinction between blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies, because Blockchain in the end is a distributed ledger or a distributed database, if you will. And every change to that database has to be validated by everyone who participates in that blockchain network. So you can see that more as an operating system. And this operating system allows users to build applications based on that operating system. So if you hear people say that they have lost money in blockchain, what they probably mean is that they have lost money while speculating on a certain asset that was implemented on a blockchain, for example, Bitcoin or Ethereum or many of these NFT projects that you hear out there.
Got it. And I guess a follow-up question I would have for you, Simon, is you mentioned early on in your description there that you could view blockchain sort of as a database. So what would you say are some of the key differences between a traditional database that people are familiar with today and these blockchain-based databases?
Oh yeah, generally from a technical perspective, they have very much in common. And the main difference is really that traditional databases are usually operated by central authorities. Like there is one IT guy that manages the database and they can change whatever they like, essentially. But about blockchain, it's really about that distribution of power, distribution of validation tasks. For example, if we talk about cryptocurrencies again, if someone sends coins to someone else, it's very easy to do that with a traditional database, but it can be manipulated. So what you would want is that a decentralized network or many people around the globe validate whether a transaction is correct. For example, if I send 100 coins to you, but I only own 5 coins, you would expect the network to reject that transaction and say, you can't do that. So that's really my take on the non-technical side of the difference between a database and a blockchain. But essentially, really, a blockchain is still a database.
And Simon, can you give us some examples in risk management where blockchain could or should play an important role?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because that's pretty much what we focus on at RYSKEX. And the idea is really, we have talked about cryptocurrencies a lot, which are essentially just, there's some logic in the blockchain. There are some account balances, and that blockchain keeps track who has how many coins, and people can transact. But that's really just the currency base. So if we start talking about a little bit more complex logic than just transferring coins, then we start talking about smart contracts, which are really just pieces of software on a blockchain that can control currencies, for example. I could create a smart contract that could be programmed so that I'm going to lock in funds for 1 year, for example. So I can send my cryptocurrencies to that smart contract, which is programmed to only release these funds after 1 year. So that's what it does. There's no way anyone gets these coins before that year has passed. And if we increase that complexity a little bit and don't say, I want to pay out after 1 year, but instead I want to pay out after a certain trigger has occurred. If we talk about parametric insurance, for example, let's say an earthquake risk, let's talk about catastrophe bonds, for example. They're often, for example, in California, and we could say that if we have an earthquake with a magnitude greater than 6, that's when the smart contract should release the funds. Obviously, that information about the earthquake and the magnitude must get into the smart contract somehow, but it is really possible to use a smart contract or different tools on a blockchain to really replace the whole structure of cat bonds as they are out there right now. in a very secure way, in a very efficient and especially cheap way.
So it sounds like so far there's more transparency, greater transparency, there's shared control. There are things such as smart contracts. All of these, in my mind, are positive. What do you think is one of the main reasons that people either resist going on and using blockchain? Is it fear? Is it misunderstanding? Is it lack of education? In your opinion, what do you think that is?
Oh, a lot of that. Because blockchain introduces many new concepts and expects people to think different. For example, an identity in the blockchain is really just a public key and a private key. I don't want to explain it because it's very cryptography based and very technical, but the overall idea is that the private key is sort of like a password, and that password should be kept safe and you cannot change it. If you own cryptocurrencies or any kind of asset on a blockchain with your private key and it gets hacked or you lose it, you lose your password, you can never recover these funds. Like if you lose your banking account data, you just go there, you show your ID and say, this is me and these are my funds, and they'll give it to you. But in the blockchain environment, if you lose your private key, it's gone. So you can hear many stories about that. People got hacked because they didn't even know it was all about the private key, or they just lost it. And then there's obviously that was pretty much the retail side and private people. But if we start looking at how and why businesses could be using blockchain but aren't, it's really the regulatory side, because blockchain is very decentralized and you could say democratic, but you could also say it's very anarchistic. And that's what we've seen over the past decade pretty much, because everybody can do what they want and everybody can promote a certain cryptocurrency or a certain project and ask people to invest in that project by buying their cryptocurrency. Or there are many different things that have happened that, even though from a technical side has very high trust level, but the projects that were implemented on a blockchain, or the projects that are out there right now, really have a very low level of trust. But it's not the technology that is flawed in that sense, it's the people and what they do with it. So there are many stories about fraud cases and people steal money, etc. And I think that's what people fear, and they don't really understand it oftentimes, but they read all these horror news about what's happening, and people are losing incredible amounts of money, and they lose faith not in that project, but they lose faith in the technology, and the government can't really do anything about it.
Yeah, John, you've got such a unique background, unique perspective on this now, and Simon, as you know, Alec, every one of these insurance sectors are so unique and specific. Right. Now John, when we issue policies, life insurance or annuities, there are a bunch of checks we make, related to fraud, identity. I can think of a couple applications that could have been blockchain, but I'm wondering, we have groups that do it today, but putting your regulator technology startup site, let's take one problem. Prescription drugs. Okay, we have a database. Laura applies for life insurance. I file with the company. She says she's in wonderful health, never had any problems. We hit a prescription database where, Simon, you probably know all these drug companies, all the prescriptions get loaded up in the central system. Check and say, oh, gee, Laura said she was not diabetic, but here's insulin or some drug related to that. If we didn't have that prescription database, John, could that be a blockchain project? Or how do you think about privacy in a situation like that, or rights or security? What would be, is that a business? Would that be a business if it didn't exist today?
Well, to me, Paul, I see the opportunity here that while it's it's interesting to think about the comment that Simon made just a few minutes ago about the reasons why people fear blockchain. It's interesting. I think that commercial businesses in the risk ecosystem, whether it be insurance companies or intermediaries or reinsurance companies, those participants of that risk and insurance market, also fear the power that blockchain has, because it becomes very threatening to the state of the world or the state of the business model in the risk and insurance. And blockchain has the ability to create, and actually it mandates much more transparency. Yet there's a lot of business models that are based upon and actually thrive upon the inefficiency in the marketplace today. And blockchain can, as I see it, has some very interesting applications to the current business models of risk-taking companies and risk companies that are seeking to manage their risk. But the power comes in, and it's a little bit concerning because it's very different. It's the transparency that there. People can't sort of say, no, I don't take those prescription drugs, or I don't have those behaviors. Yet actually now through technology, we have access to a lot more data which can actually prove or disprove those statements. And that makes a lot of people nervous and really want to push back and say we don't want to use it. But for the insurance industry, it can make it much more efficient. We can make more timely and enhanced risk decisions, whether we want to accept a risk or not accept a risk, or whether we want to actually place a risk and transfer that risk out. And that's where I think that blockchain as an operating system actually can transform the industry and actually create better regulation of the industry. But again, that's very threatening because certain people may not trust it, but there's other people who basically fear it because it's going to require significant change on their business models.
Well, yeah, and some of these queries, they cost us, you can't make this up, $10, $15. Is this what Laura says to me true or false? So Simon, how do you think about privacy? And with transparency, Laura said it's transparency, great. Sometimes we don't want transparency, we want privacy. How does that mesh? Go ahead,
Can
Alec.
I jump in on one of these?
Yeah.
So I think an important distinction too is you're asking a very good question about privacy. And Simon mentioned earlier a typical belief with these blockchains is that they're kind of anarchy, right? It's like anybody can access it, anybody can change it, but that's not always the case. There's many different forms of blockchains. So there's private permission, there's private permissionless. There's ways to secure a blockchain so only participants that you want to let into the system have access to the system. So that kind of addresses the whole trust issue that you were bringing up, as I see it. But I'd love to hear what Simon has to say about that too.
I totally agree. That's a very good point, that there are many different ways to use blockchain, and also at least limit the transparency in a certain way. But Paul, the point you made, that there is that high level of transparency and trust, but also you want privacy, is a very important one if we start talking about putting personal data on a blockchain, which is pretty much something that will never happen because blockchains are immutable and you can, they grow. Nothing is ever deleted that happened on a blockchain, which means that if you put personal data on it, it will never be deleted. And that violates a person's right to be forgotten. That's a right that we have. So with these types of use cases, it is very hard to, let's say, draw the line between transparency and privacy. And even that blockchains are very transparent, you can see every single transaction. But if you look at who has sent one Bitcoin to someone else, the identities are very, very cryptic. So you don't read a name, you don't read someone's ID number or whatever. It is incredibly cryptic.
The University of Hartford Barney School of Business is recognized nationally and internationally for its ever-evolving curriculums, experiential learning opportunities, and innovative career-ready programs. The school has been ranked as one of the top business schools in the country by both Bloomberg Business and the Princeton Review. The school's AACSB accreditation places the Barney School among the top 5% of business schools in the world.
Let's push it even further. You mentioned the word immutable, right?
Yeah.
One hand, that's positive. It's interesting. You already raised the right to be forgotten. Well, if it's immutable, okay, that's interesting. How about security, right? Because you look at the encryption schemes or the math behind the algorithms today. Now, if we've created an encrypted blockchain, vintage 2022, okay, fast forward 5 years, we've had quantum computing that can crack whatever the algorithm. How secure does this stay over time if it doesn't change?
That's a great point. Yeah. But we should generally probably make one thing clear. On a blockchain, nothing is really encrypted, at least not on the standard ones. Things are secured using cryptography, but cryptography is not necessarily only about encryption. But you're absolutely right. If you put encrypted data on the blockchain, it's going to stay there even after the encryption has been cracked. So yes, if quantum computing becomes more and more advanced, and it's actually not just the fact that someone has a quantum computer, but they're actually willing to start decrypting blockchains or attack private keys or whatever they could do, that's definitely an issue. The data will always be decrypted and be completely transparent to everyone.
So go ahead, Alec.
No, I was just going to say, is there any technologies right now that could maybe prevent that, or would you have to build a new blockchain technology based off of quantum computing to keep it secure against quantum computers, or is there methods already being put in place to kind of help secure blockchains from that threat?
Yeah, that's the question the smartest IT guys and security experts ask every day, because it's always that it's called post-quantum computing, and you want to make sure that you have algorithms in place that will still be secure once there are quantum computers. So some blockchains allow the cryptographic algorithms to be replaced, which means that once there is a quantum computer and the blockchain could be attacked, the algorithms could be replaced with ones that are secure. But that's really something that is incredibly technical, incredibly complex. And it's also really about predictions, because no one really knows what happens and what quantum computers will be capable of. But it's definitely something that will be absolutely relevant in 10 to 20 years.
Well, that's pretty amazing, because that takes me to Tomorrowland, which is something that as I find very interesting to think about. But one of the things I see, to follow up, Paul, back to the question you asked me before, is the ability for blockchain in its current form to actually add great efficiency to the risk processes that we have, like risk transfer and risk acceptance. And I'm old enough to know that we grew up in the insurance industry thinking that the insurance premium dollar, 65 cents of that dollar was allocated to paying claims, and 35% was allocated to paying the expenses associated with the transaction. What we've evolved over, my professional career in terms of decades, is that we really can't sustain that inefficiency, that 35% expense component, where of every risk dollar that's out there, or a risk unit, if you will, 35% of that unit value is allocated to expenses. And blockchain really offers us, I think, the opportunity to reduce that 35% amount significantly, and leave a higher percentage of that risk unit available to those who are either are accepting that risk. And that's where I think it brings great efficiency to the risk ecosystem to do that. Now, clearly, there's a lot of industry that's evolved over 300 years in that risk and insurance ecosystem that actually makes money with the inefficiency. But for actually objectively putting the risk out there, that this risk blockchain really offers the opportunity to significantly enhance the processes with this blockchain as an operating system and bring great efficiency and improve the amount of risk units that are actually allocated to financing the event or the adverse event.
Totally. And that's not just for technical reasons. I'd like to make one comment about that, because in order for you to actually put something that you could call insurance or parametric risk transfer, or however you want to call it, on the blockchain, you have to simplify it first. Because it is not helpful to put 1,000 pages insurance policy on a blockchain. There's zero efficiency gain. But if you simplify that thing, like to the bare minimum, then John, you're totally right. It's going to excel, and it's going to reduce administration costs and structuring costs, etc.
Yeah, I think the opportunities to drive costs out mean we could offer smaller and smaller policies, John. Right? I think it opens the door to microinsurance in a way that we never could until today.
I like that a concept of micro insurance or micro risk contracts. That's a very interesting piece, because I think what that does then is it opens up a lot more possibilities for risk seeding entities either who own the risk today and want to move it and transfer it. They can do it on a faster but more laser focused basis, and it makes the risk acceptance process on the other end of that transaction faster and quicker and more efficient as well. And that's where I think that these are the applications that I see that blockchain really brings, and that's my personal interest, is that it really opens up a whole new way of facilitating these interconnections within the risk and insurance ecosystem.
Yeah. Now, all following along sort of the regulatory dimension, does regulation help or hurt the blockchain? And I could argue both ways. We've seen central banks create frameworks, start to build frameworks over the last year or two for currency. We just saw the executive order from the Biden administration. At the same time, we see Russia and China starting to throw up huge walls, almost creating separate internets. What are your thoughts? Regulators, friends or foe for growth of the blockchain?
I would think, in my opinion, they'd be friends. I mean, anything that's more regulated is going to see more institutional adoption. Because these large institutions, one of their major barriers to adopting blockchain technology is, I think, that it's kind of like the Wild West still. There's really no regulation in it. And until that regulation comes along, they can only kind of view from the sidelines this innovation that's happening. So that's kind of the way I view it.
I like Alex's characterization of the Wild West. Yeah, I wanted to hear what Simon said, because in the U.S., of course, that euphemism of the Wild West, we use it all the time. And how does that translate kind of into the EU perspective, or living on the border of this perhaps emerging ecosystem of that is building in Europe, of us versus them?
Yeah, we didn't have a Wild West, so we just use yours as a metaphor. But we use the same analogy, really. And you're totally right. I also agree with Alec, because every project really just was pure anarchy on the blockchain, and there were so many fraudulent cases, and people just ripped money out of innocent investors or innocent retail traders or whoever. And I think that regulation is totally necessary so that there will be business adoption. So I totally agree with what Alex said. And I also think that it is regulators tend to over-regulate things, especially in Germany. But I think that the blockchain as a whole has so many or provides so many opportunities so that even if a certain thing was over-regulated, the money would just move somewhere else. And so I think regulation is definitely a friend, and it's definitely necessary for business adoption. And what China and Russia are going to do with the technology is very difficult to say. I mean, China, for example, banned cryptocurrencies to quite some extent. It is still possible for Chinese people to interact with the cryptocurrencies using virtual private networks or proxy servers or whatever, but it's going to be very difficult. And I'm curious what the future is going to bring at that point, especially for Russia.
So staying on the theme rather of future, what do you think what are some of the key roadblocks? I know we've been talking about them along this conversation, but are there specific roadblocks that you want to call out that you could see, standing in the way of at least, adoption from a faster perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I'd mention stable coins. We've talked about cryptocurrencies a lot, and most people associate that with Bitcoin, Ether, you name them. There are thousands of them, and they don't have sort of a central bank, but it's purely driven by supply and demand by speculators. So they're incredibly volatile and far away from stable. So there was the idea of a stable coin, which means that there is some central exchange that issues that stable coin, which is the exact same thing as a cryptocurrency. But they say, you can give us, for every dollar you give us, we issue one coin. We give that one coin to you. And whenever you send us back that coin, we're going to give you back $1. So that's the idea of putting fiat money on a blockchain to use it inside of the blockchain environment. And
interesting. So that almost it takes care of this. Who's the central bank issue?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, there's still some central authority there that has to manage and issue that currency, but there are ways to make that in a distributed way or decentralized way so that you can actually have a stable asset that you can transact in on the blockchain. And while that's technically possible already, it still works. People transact using USDT, for example, which is the US dollar token on the blockchain. Or there's GUSD from the Gemini exchange, which was founded by the Winklevoss twins. And so there are many of these stablecoins out there, but they still lack regulatory approval. So technically that works, but businesses are still very careful to just use some unregulated exchange, put millions of dollars into their custody and just to use their token. But I think that's going to we will see widespread adoption of a handful of stablecoins in the very near future. And I think regulators are already focusing on them.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing to me, for me to hear. I mean, Paul, I mean, just think about what that does in terms of if we have a stable token or coin, which can be used on blockchain. That seems to me to relieve a lot of the questions and the stability and the concerns about using blockchain as an operating system. If we can have transactions that are conducted with a stable coin, and then we can deal with the second issue in terms of coming up with sort of the simplified contracts, that are associated with the transactions, which actually, Paul, gets to your point about micro contracts, that it opens up a whole new world of possibilities with respect to the risk business that we have in terms of the transfer and acceptance of risk, and using this new enhanced operating system versus relying on something that supported an industry that's 350 years old. It's really a fast forward movement from my perspective.
Oh, it absolutely is. Now, and time goes fast. We're at the end of our scheduled time. But what a great discussion. I mean, John, what are your takeaways or thoughts you'd want to leave with the audience?
Well, to me, I think hopefully we can start together by having conversations and dialogues like this. Is understand the concepts of blockchain and that demystifying it and understanding its power as an operating system. And Simon, I love the fact that you gave me that new uh, label to use in my thinking and in my conversations to help people understand what it is. It's an operating system. But I think the thing that has the opportunity now is to really address the applications of blockchain and start to build that out, whether it's in the risk financing or the risk and insurance ecosystem, or whether it's in healthcare, or whether it's in manufacturing, where you have advanced manufacturing, which assembles components that come from many different places. Or if you're looking at transferring, life and health risks, it really helps us create sort of the future for conducting the transactions and doing it in an efficient and effective way, and in a way that's trusted, and people can be confident and not sort of say, I have to leave a margin on the table for perhaps the information not being correct or being true or whatever. You can actually eliminate that portion in the risk financing process and make this risk and world operate in a sort of this fintech, insurtech new world.
And Simon, I would be sorry, Paul. I would be remiss in not asking the question. What is your why here? Why did you get into this? And what do you hope for the future?
I got into this because I'm fascinated by the technology. It is just as John said, the opportunities are incredible for the whole world, and not just from a financial perspective. I mean, everything on the blockchain right now is very much financial focused, but I think there's going to be a lot more use cases. I think there are a lot of opportunities to not just put old business cases on a blockchain and simplify them, but also come up with completely new ways of thinking. And I love how creative you can be with that technology. And every week I have something that I read about, and I think I didn't even know you could do that. So that fascination has never stopped since I started learning about it.
And Alec, your why as a student? How'd you get interested, and what are you looking forward to?
It's very similar to Simon's. I'm extremely interested in the technology. I've been fascinated by some of these applications, and something in particular that Simon mentioned about how down the line there's going to be applications that nobody's even thought of yet. An example I like to use for that is in the early 2000s, late 99, when the internet was just coming around and was gaining popularity. Nobody would have ever thought that 15 years, 14 years down the line, when Uber comes around, that the internet has now totally revolutionized the taxi industry. Nobody at that time in the early 2000s would have thought something like that could happen. And I kind of see us being at the same point right now with blockchain, where 10, 15 years down from the line from now, there's going to be applications that nobody's even thought of yet. And it's that kind of excitement that wants me to be involved in this space, because there's so many opportunities to build cool products.
Yeah.
Okay, Laura, your turn. What was your biggest aha during this discussion?
I've had several. I've been taking notes the entire time. I would say it's the Wild West anarchy element. That struck me as interesting. I know that I'm going to be reading more, and we'll be linking to some resources in the show notes, so listeners can do the same. But really getting a better understanding and a clearer way to explain to people what blockchain is. So for me, those were the two biggest takeaways. Paul, how about yourself?
The layers, right? The layers involved in driving, Simon, the technology through society, and who knows how it will impact us. But I'm with you. Yeah. I think it'll be I think we'll be shocked not 10 years from now, but 5 years from now, how it's changed our world. Mm-hmm. So Simon, if people want to find out more about your company, more about the work you're doing, where's the best place to go?
Definitely RYSKEX.com. And maybe even if there are any questions from the audience or from you even, I am on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect and ask questions.
Great.
Feel free to reach out.
Okay, excellent. All right. Listen, thank you, everybody, and we want to thank our listeners, and join us next.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, guys.
The University of Hartford is based in Connecticut, an integral part of the tri-state region. The University of Hartford's Barney School of Business is recognized nationally and internationally for its ever-evolving curriculums, experiential learning opportunities, and innovative career-ready programs. The school has been ranked as one of the top business schools in the country by both Bloomberg Business and the Princeton Review. The school's AACSB accreditation places the Barney School among the top 5% of business schools in the world.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information about this company and other great startups at imagine.nfg.com.